So we would continue from yesterday, and let me before showing the before sharing the screen, I'll just show you those nice symmetric objects which I showed you yesterday, because our discussion is going to be around those objects only. So let's identify them by name first, and some nice group theory will and geometry will come out of this. So this object, well, first I'll show the easier one. This you already know, right? Cube. So cube is already known to all of us. This is easy. It has 6 faces. So this is a face and this is an edge. So cube, if you count, there are 4 edges on the top, 4 edges on the bottom, and then 4 which are vertical. So 12 edges are there, and it has 6 faces, right? Front, back, top, bottom, left, right, like that. And it has vertices. So vertices are these corners. So how many corners does it have? It has 8 corners, right? 4 up, 4 down, like that, 8 corners. So this is cube. And this is also reasonably symmetric object, and we are going to understand symmetries of such objects. Cube is of course known to you, and tetrahedron is also known to you. Somewhere people in chemistry like tetrahedron a lot. So, so each side is a triangle. You can see that, right? So there are 4 triangles, there are 4 triangular faces which it has, and there are 6 edges. So there are 3 edges which are um, from up to down. You can see these 3 edges, 1, 2, and 1 here, 3. So 1, 2, and 3, and then 3 edges at the bottom, right? And then you have this thing which is octahedron. Octa is 8, so it has 8 faces. So you can see 8 faces, right? So 4 faces like as a pyramid up, 4 faces bottom, very much like diamond kind of structure. Each side is triangular, right? So just familiarize yourself with the shape. And another interesting shapes are this is dodecahedron. So dodeca is 12. So it has 12 sides, 12 faces, right? So there are 12 faces, dodecahedron, and it has many edges. It would have been interesting to count them right here, but anyway. And this is uh, what is called icosahedron. So icosa is 20. So it has 20 faces. 20 triangular faces are there. And if you see it like this, right? What you see is actually there are 5 triangles, right? Let me put, yeah, in the right angle. So you can see 5 triangles, right? Which are arranged like so. This is forming a pentagon. And here, if you see dodecahedron, you actually see a pentagon here, right? And each vertex, if you take any vertex here, it is having 3 edges coming out of it. And if you take any vertex here, you have 5 edges coming out of it. So these are actually dual to each other. There is face vertex duality. We'll see in this lecture. So far, is it okay? We are going to understand certain objects. Okay. And these in some sense are perfectly symmetric 3-dimensional objects. So far, are you with me? So with that,
Yes, sir.
I'll share my screen. Yeah, visible. Screen is visible, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Great. Okay. So let me talk about rotations of these objects, and from that we'll understand a lot about uh, SO3. So platonic solid is one keyword for today's lecture, and this, let's say, we already know. Last time, that is yesterday, we saw it. So quick recall would go. Uh, so we saw yesterday rotation matrices. So you can understand rotations in 2 and 3 dimensions, in n dimensions also, but let's forget it. Rotation as matrices. So rotation matrices in R2, and this was also a question in tutorial, but nevertheless, you can write rotation matrices as something like cos theta minus sin theta, cos theta. So when this matrix is multiplied with some vector a comma b, written in a column way, in vertical way, what you get is a cos theta minus b sin theta, and then you get a sin theta plus b cos theta, which are precisely the coordinates of the point which is obtained after rotating this point, rotating the point a comma b, ab. Okay, so this would be called rotation matrix. Yeah, rotation theta. Okay, so these matrices are rotation matrices. So this is rotation by theta. And as we know, rotation matrices have something to do with A transpose A being identity, and also determinant being 1. Yeah. So if you impose this condition on a 2 by 2 matrix, you will automatically get this rotation matrix. Or even otherwise, using some understanding of trigonometry or geometry, you can derive that rotation matrices in R2 look like this. And because of that, what you have is that SO2, meaning all rotations in 2 dimension, is of the form r theta, such that theta is a real number. Maybe theta is from 0 to 2 pi, but it doesn't matter. Theta is real number. Okay, so all these are rotation matrices. And if you see, if you take r theta, r phi, what you have is r theta plus phi, right? Our common sense. We rotate by theta and then rotate by phi. Well, rather you first rotate by phi and then rotate by theta. The way we compose function is from right to left. So answer is r theta plus phi, and this addition is an abelian operation. So this is actually an abelian group. Yeah. So there is no doubt on that. It's an abelian group because anti-rotations in R2 they commute. Okay. And here I ask you a question. And the question is, and that is kind of two-dimensional analog for platonic solids, if you allow me to say that. So what regular polygons, or maybe which regular polygons, yeah, which would be the better phrase to, can be inscribed in a triangle, in a circle? Very basic question and not difficult at all. What's the answer? All, right? Any regular n gun. So I take a circle, and inside the circle, whatever n I want, I can divide this circle into n equal parts. I can divide it, for example, in my drawing is bad. So maybe I can divide it in as many parts as I want, right? The arc. So let's say I divide it into 1, 2, 3, 4 equal parts, and then I can make a square, right? I can inscribe one foregon inside it. So here is a regular foregon because I can identify 4 equidistant points on the arc. Yeah, just it's not allowing me to, yeah, something. Okay, all for every n. That is for every n. For every natural number, I have one regular polygon which is inscribed in circle. And what is this? What are rotations of square? Rotations of a square are, of course, as I say, identity. I'm denoting by E, doing nothing, right? And then rotation by pi by 2, and rotation by its multiples, rotation by pi, and rotation by 3 pi by 2, right? And this is a cyclic group, right? So what are we to conclude? That all cyclic subgroups are all cyclic groups occur as a subgroup of SO2, right? I hope that conclusion is okay. All cyclic groups are subgroups of SO2 because we have found a configuration on the periphery of the circle where so this is a configuration of points, so they're equally distributed along the arc, and that's all. That is good enough for constructing cyclic group of n order. And now I want to ask the same question for uh, 3 dimensions. Okay. Okay, so yeah, so everyone is with me so far. So in 3 dimension, I would ask the same question, the third dimension. And there I'll have to write some matrices which represent rotation. So let me take the simplest example of matrix which represents rotation in 3 dimension. So what you can do is you just imagine a sphere, right? So when you take sphere and you rotate it by say z axis. So you hold it like this and then rotate it. Okay. Just pretend that this is sphere. Just pretend that this is sphere. You hold it vertically, about vertical axis, and then rotate. So when you rotate an arbitrary point x, y, z, what is happening to the z coordinate? Z coordinate is actually not changing in the process, right? Because I'm holding by the vertical axis, the vertical point. So if something is having certain height of the point is not changing, right? So with that thing in mind, what I can write is a matrix which is rotation matrix in 3 dimension. I write this matrix r theta z, and such matrices will come into this tutorial. So this is what? This is a matrix of rotation by an angle of theta. Okay, when the axis is, and the axis of rotation is and the axis of rotation is z axis. Okay, So what is the matrix? I can write, and then I hope you would vouch for it. So what, the only movement which is happening that way is only in the x and y coordinates. So I put that cos theta minus sine theta, sine theta, cos theta, and uh, z axis is just there, but it's not contributing in the rotation. Okay, so I have this. So if I have um, so if I have say point A B C in space, so C, which is the height, is not changing. So if I multiply this matrix with the column vector ABC, you would see that its effect is rotation in first two dimensions, and third dimension, the height in this case is not changed. So this is a rotation matrix when the axis is z axis. And similarly, I do write rotation matrix in uh, when your axis is y axis and z axis. Okay, or maybe that could be that could be an exercise. Yeah, that would be an exercise. So write r theta y r theta x, and somewhere actually I am cheating here because there is a choice of clockwise or anti-clockwise involved. When you see the plane, you are already biased towards one particular uh, direction which you choose to call anti-clockwise, right? Of course, the person who is sitting opposite side will have a opposite viewpoint, but nevertheless, but in three dimensions, there is no natural choice of clockwise or anti-clockwise. So when I say I'm rotating by angle theta, it's not clear that in space you are looking from certain direction, and which direction is anti-clockwise or which direction is clockwise. So one approach could be taken is that you take what is called positive choice of your axis, the three axis, and with that choice you just go on the top of the axis and look at the other two axes, and from x to y is the clockwise direction. From x to y, when you move it's going to be called clockwise direction. So somewhere you have to choose clockwise versus anti-clockwise. uh, Clockwise versus anti-clockwise, because all these are relative things, choice is involved. That choice will be involved. In fact, maybe I should just say rather than giving you exercise, because my choice here is r theta y is looking somewhat different. So for r theta y, I will have things like 0 1 0 here and 0 1 0, right? Because my y axis, my y direction coordinate will not change. But for other thing, rather than having cos theta and minus sine theta, I'll have cos theta sine theta minus sine theta cos theta. And see, this is just a matter of choice actually. And r theta z, but you could have taken minus sine theta up there also and said that okay, for me clockwise has some other meaning. And for not z, x, z I have already written. Theta x is so here 1 0 0 1 0 0, right? And then cos theta minus sine theta, sine theta cos theta, and all these are obtained essentially from our high school understanding of geometry. Okay,
So can you
so
repeat the clockwise, anti-clockwise thing you said?
see, when I say that uh, in space you rotate something by angle theta, right? It's not very well defined thing, because if I say rotate by pi by 2, right, in space, it's not clear whether it's not clear what is clockwise or what is anti-clockwise, because you are sitting here and the axis could be some other axis, right? It may not be just right in front of your eyes so that you have clear understanding of what is clockwise for you, what is anti-clockwise for you, right? Axis could be some oblique axis, some theta axis, right? Somewhere. So you may not be able to make a very clear choice of what is clockwise or anti-clockwise. In general, clockwise or anti-clockwise is subjective, right? That we appreciate. It is subjective because what is clockwise for me is anti-clockwise for the person sitting opposite.
Yes, sir.
And when there is no clear direction, when there is no clear front for me, that time making a decision what is clockwise or anti-clockwise is not possible in a consistent way. Okay, because axis is somewhere in space.
Okay, okay, sir. Okay.
Because I am sitting here, I cannot, and clockwise anti-clockwise is anyway objective. It is not objective choice. It's subjective choice. So rather than saying clockwise, anti-clockwise, because these terminologies are not very mathematical, I am fixing that, okay, these are the three rotation matrices in 3 dimensions. Okay. When you perform this operation, this is what I am calling rotation by theta. So whatever direction you call it, clockwise or anti-clockwise. Yeah.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay. And using this, you should be able to conclude that SO3, because all these matrices are in SO3. So in fact, it will be a good idea to check that these are in SO3. That means these matrices satisfy A transpose A is identity and determinant is 1, right? And from all this, you conclude that SO3 is non-commutative. In particular, if you take a cube, right, you take a cube and you first take axis, which is Z axis, rotate by pi by 2, and then you pick, say X axis, rotate by pi by 2, there is a final outcome. Or you first rotate by pi by 2 and then rotate by uh, Z axis. So first rotate by X axis and Z axis, answer is going to be different in both the cases. Okay, so that you can check because of non-commutativity of these rotation matrices. Of course, if you choose angles carefully which are like pi and all that, then in some cases some commuting elements will be there, but otherwise it is non-commutative group. Okay, all that fine. So this was just to give you a glimpse into rotations in 3 dimension. Tomorrow I'll talk more about it. And let me ask the same question which I had asked in the beginning about polygons, regular polygons, uh, which regular polygons can be inscribed inside a circle, and answer was absolutely clear, all regular n-gons. And here the same question for uh, 3 dimensions. So question is, which regular polyhedra can be inscribed in a sphere, right? So polyhedra is like what I have shown you. So poly is many and hedra is like faces. This is Greek word for faces, right? So for example, if you have tetrahedron, and it can simply be translated as like four faces, right? Four faces is tetrahedron, it has four faces. Or in Hindi, they may call chatush falak, right? Falak is one side. Okay. Uh, so this question stands, and I ask further a question. What's the meaning of this? So one has to first clarify what is the meaning of this and why are we doing it? What's the purpose of doing this? One of the purpose one can define is that In case of two dimensions, when you realize that okay, you can embed any, you can inscribe any n-gon inside a circle, from that you concluded that all cyclic groups are there in SO2. Okay. Similarly, we'll try to identify groups of rotations of these regular polyhedra as subgroups of SO3, and that has very interesting history as well. Mm, I don't know if I will be able to say much about that, but nevertheless, it's genuine for me to now define it to you what are these regular polyhedra. So another name for regular polyhedra is going to be Platonic solids. Okay. This is what I mean by regular polyhedra. So what are Platonic solids? Uh, um, hmm, Rather than writing too much, I'll just say that uh, their faces, their faces are regular n-gons. Okay, and all faces are congruent. All faces are congruent. Okay, so any of these things which I took, so everything is regular 3-gon in this case because I am taking triangle, right? So all faces are congruent triangles here. Similarly, all faces are regular pentagons here. So that is first part. Second part is, if you take any two faces, two distinct faces, they intersect precisely at an edge, or not, I should not say at, but any two distinct faces intersect, or maybe yeah, there should be better language. So what I want to say is that if you take any two faces, take their intersection, and that is precisely forming the collection of all the edges. So I should say intersection of any two distinct faces is precisely an edge. So there is no haphazard configuration of these faces. So any two faces, and that is an edge. So there is no shifting or something in the arrangement of faces. And third thing is that if you take any three faces, okay, so at each vertex, an equal number of faces meet. So for example, say if you are taking cube, right? So in cube, you take any vertex. At each vertex, there are three faces which are meeting. These three, right? These three faces are meeting at this vertex. That is true for all the things. And similarly, you take, say, octahedron. In case of octahedron, at each vertex, how many faces are meeting?
Four.
4. Yeah, that's correct. So in all this, there are two numbers which are naturally coming in this discussion. One is n, and another is M, which is number of faces which are meeting at a vertex. And
Sir,
with, yeah,
sir, is prism a platonic solid or not?
see, prism, I would ask what is the definition of prism, because uh, so if you can tell me what exactly is your definition of prism, because it may have some different meanings, right? So someone may just have some four sides together and all that is a prism. So prism or pyramid, they are not very it has different meaning for different people, right? For someone in physics it may have some meaning, for someone in architecture it may have some meaning. So what is prism for us?
So I mean to say, whether is it important that we have to have only one type of n-gon at each face, or
Yes, yes, that is important. That's what I'm actually looking for, if you allow me to say, perfect symmetry. Okay,
okay, sir.
you're understanding my point. I want perfect symmetry, but of finite objects. See, in some sense, circle was an infinite object because you could rotate by any angle, and which is parameterized by a real number. So any choice of real number will give you rotation. Similarly, for sphere, any choice of axis and any arbitrary amount of rotation will give you one no, element of SO3. So those are finite objects. Those are infinite objects, infinite groups. I'm trying to look for some finite objects sitting inside those infinite objects. In particular, there were regular n-gons for 2 dimension, and for 3 dimensions, I want some notion of finite, perfectly symmetric objects. And therefore, at this point, I don't want to compromise on that notion of perfect. Of course, there are some notions where people do compromise on that, and they come up with what are called Keplerian solids. Okay, Kepler, as you know, was a physicist who did work in astronomy. Okay, uh, and you might be knowing Kepler's law and all that. And he discovered actually many things which were almost perfect, but they were compromising what you are saying. So what you are saying, yes, people have thought about it and they have come up with nice theory of all those things. But here we are restricting our attention to platonic solids. Uh, is that okay with you?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, because see, for prism, some people may take not the equilateral triangles but isosceles triangles, and then they may arrange them in some way, and still the light will pass through in a way which obeys physics and all that. So that is different discussion. Okay, so here we are interested in perfectly symmetric objects in 3 dimension. Uh, I hope the answer is not disappointing for you. We can discuss about it later also. Okay, so with all this, we have what we call Schlafly symbol. So what is Schlafly symbol? Schlafly symbol is simply which way, n comma m, n comma m maybe. Yeah, n comma m. So each platonic solid, so to each platonic solid, I associate this number, which is, you know, which n-gon, and at each vertex, how many faces are meeting. So given the platonic solid, I would associate this number. Okay, is that fine? So for example, now you are going to tell me, and I'm just going to write the names of these platonic solids. I start with the simplest one. Tetrahedron, and what else? Cube, octahedron, and I have dodecahedron. Dodeca was 12. icosahedron, and you can simply tell me what are their Schläfli symbols. So I will just show you. Tetrahedron is this, right? So what's the Schläfli symbol for it?
So 3 and 3.
3 comma 3, right? 3 comma 3. For cube, what is the Schläfli symbol?
4, 3.
Yeah, right. 4 comma 3. And for octahedron,
8,
8, 4.
tick tick. No, not quite. Not quite 8.
3,
Okay.
4.
3 comma 4, right? Sorry, I heard 8. I'm sorry. 3 comma 4, yeah. And next guy is this, right? What's the symbol for it?
5, 3.
5 comma 3. And last, this guy.
3,
3,
5.
5.
Absolutely. Good, 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 good. So I'm so happy that everyone is with me and we are thinking alike. Okay. 3 comma 5. Okay. Aha. So you see something, right? They're actually duals of each other. In what sense? This is kind of a vertex face duality. Rather than saying more on that, maybe it's good uh, if you just to play with these things. And yeah, maybe in the tutorial by that I'll send you how to make these things, as Professor Geeta was asking. See, what you can do is actually at the midpoint of, for example, icosahedron, you can identify, you can put certain vertices on the midpoints of icosahedron, huh? And when you connect them through edges, you actually will get dodecahedron. So from each face, so each face in some sense can be converted into a vertex. Rather, midpoint of each face can be converted into a vertex, and that's how you will get this. And if you do the same thing with this guy, so if you put a midpoint for each face and you connect them in a way, shortest way, then you would obtain icosahedron. Okay, so that sense they are dual, and this chap, the tetrahedron, is dual to itself. Okay, so there is some nice thing which is happening uh, with all this. Now the question is, can I have a platonic solid which is made out of, say, hexagon? Is the question fine? Are you with me? Are you getting the question?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
Yes. The question is, can I make a platonic solid? So these were examples. These 5 were examples. And my question is, can I make a platonic solid which has hexagons, or maybe which is made of heptagons or any gons that you want? Okay. Can you imagine one platonic solid which is made of 100 gons? It will be fun, right? And answer is no. Answer is that these are the only possibilities. Okay. And that's a theorem. Theorem is, there are only 5 platonic solids as listed above. Okay. And that is also an indication to something, that if you consider the rotation groups of these platonic solids, perhaps those could be the only, in some sense, only finite subgroups of SO3. Okay, that's just a dream at this point right now for us, but uh, but we'll see that it is actually realized. The thing is, how will I prove? How difficult is the proof of it? Proof is not at all difficult actually. So I will be able to demonstrate to you in very easy fashion that there are only 5 platonic solids. So in other words, with a hexagon or any other large gun, you can't make a platonic solid. Okay, so how do I prove it? So proof, let me, you already know N and you already know M, right? Okay, I'll introduce this notation. V is number of, and you know what, right? Number of vertices. F is number of faces, and E, maybe, I don't know why, but I tend to keep the edges at the second place. E is number of edges. Okay, and NM is anyway given Schlafly symbol. So we know what are these numbers, right? Okay, and here is the only observation which is required. So observation is this: you take F. F is what? Number of faces. Okay, so I take or rather, let me not take F first, let me take N. I take N. N is what? What N gun is used, right? What N gun is used here. And if I multiply N, so this is one pentagon, there is another pentagon, there is another pentagon. How many pentagons are there? So total, I am actually multiplying it by how many pentagons are there. So this is 5, for example, and this is how many faces are there. Okay. And what quantity is it counting? It is counting number of edges, right? I just wanted to count total number of edges. So what I did, I multiplied this 5, I multiplied this N by total number of faces. So I just simply multiplied, except that I have made one small mistake because my intention was to count number of edges. What I have ended up is I have ended up counting each edge twice because this edge, this particular edge was counted when I was multiplying this 5 with this face and also with the other face. Okay, so each edge has been multiplied twice. I hope you are with me on this observation. And
Yes, sir.
and similarly, for each vertex, for each vertex, I'm counting how many faces are uh, adjacent to it, right? How many faces are meeting at it. So if I multiply this number of vertices with M, right? So if I do MV, MV, okay, what will it be? Can you observe? I multiply M with V. So to each vertex, I am counting how many edges are adjacent to it, right? So again, when I'm counting for this vertex and when I'm counting for this vertex, these two vertices, right? These two ones, these two, where my fingers are, these two, right? I'm counting this edge twice. So
2E.
this is also 2E, okay? So both the numbers are 2E. And I'm not sure if you have read graph theory. Graphs are not as like as in functions, but graphs are like as networks, right? Networks. There are nodes or vertices, and then there are edges. So nodes and connecting paths, right? So a consequence of graph theory, which is called Euler's formula.
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, can you please explain how we got MV is equals to 2E?
Mm. Second one, right? Which
Yes,
one?
sir.
Which one? I'll pick some. Okay. So you look at this. Okay. Here. So you pick one vertex. Okay. What is it counting? How many edges are its neighbors, right? Or in other words, how many faces are meeting at it? So it is counting how many edges are involved in this vertex, meaning how many edges are say if you want to say emerging from this vertex. Okay, how many edges? And here also for other vertex, same question is being asked, and in the process this edge is being counted twice. Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes. Yes.
See, such things will come. See, if someone tells, it might be difficult for you to grasp immediately, but you make the object, stare at it for half an hour, and you will start observing things. So staring at objects is extremely important in maths. So what Euler's formula says is V minus E plus F, not just for platonic solids, but for anything, any graph. You have V minus E plus F. This is 2, always. And now I combine this fact, this thing and this thing together. Okay. So what do I get? Therefore, in place of V, I can write 2E by M, right? Minus in place of E, I just write E. In place of F, I write 2E by N. And that is 2. And I do some manipulation here and there. Okay. Uh, so with some high school manipulation or even junior high school manipulation, what I get is that if I take the reciprocals of the numbers occurring in the Schläfli symbol, then this is equal to half plus 1 by E. Half plus 1 by E, which anyway is more than half. Are you with me on this? Yeah?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Good. So what it says? It says that if M and N are too large, you see, you look at it. If M and N are too large, then this reciprocal will be too small. But here, in some sense, we have now God-given condition that sum of reciprocals of Schläfli symbols, numbers occurring in the Schläfli symbols, cannot be too small. It has to maintain at least half. It has to go beyond half. And that puts an upper bound on these numbers. Is that point clear to us? So M and N cannot be too large. So message of all this is that M and N can't be too large. And question is, how large can they be? In fact, the only solutions And of course, I'm talking about n-gons, right? With n greater than equal to 3 are, what are the only solutions? And I'm just writing those solutions. So n and m, the only solutions are, and you are familiar with these numbers, isn't it? These are the only solutions.
Discuss them.
Yeah. So we are already familiar with these numbers, and therefore we have no option but to conclude that. And all these correspond to the 5 cases that we have talked about. Because with 3,3, there's only one possibility, namely tetrahedron. With 3,4, there's only one possibility, namely octahedron. So only 5 platonic solids are there. Okay. So I have been somewhat ultra modern here because I have used relatively newer discovery in maths, relatively newer meaning a couple of centuries ago. But even during Plato's time, this was known. And no, not Plato's time, this Euclid's time. So Euclid was the person who came up with all this. And there's a classic proof which involves solid angles, and that is due to Euclid. So Euclid's elements, if you have heard about the Euclid's elements, is a classic the surprising thing is also has a proof of it. So this is very ancient theorem. It's very surprising. There are many books on it. I think 13th book on elements has this. Yeah. But anyway, it's good to simplify things using Euler's formula in graph theory. So are you with me in this? So we have therefore discovered that what I have on my table right now, these are the only perfect regular shapes. Of course, a sphere is one in 3 dimensions, but sphere is like kind of infinite object. It has infinitely many rotations. Okay, so now our job would be to understand what rotations of platonic solids. Yeah. And that is not very difficult. The only thing is that I must tell you how can you tabulate all this. So how can you tabulate? Let me just take one example. Say, which example should I take? Maybe I should take easier example first. I take the case of tetrahedron. So what would be the rotations in it? So let me say type 0. Yeah, why not? Type 0 is, say, identity. That is always the rotation, right? So I won't even call it type 1, type 0. Type 1 would be, okay, so let me pick tetrahedron here. Okay, so here is a tetrahedron. Oops, yeah, okay. And you can see you can see it in this way. So what I'm doing is, the way I'm holding it, I'm having vertex, top vertex, and the midpoint of the opposite face. So when I hold it like this, and then I rotate, okay, then I rotate by 120 degree, and then I rotate by further 120 degree. Okay, so if I hold it like this, or if I hold like this, or if I hold like this, it's the same thing, right? So I'm keeping the topmost vertex fixed. Let me try to draw Tetrahedron. I'm sure I'll do a poor job here. Yeah, no idea how to do that, but still. Oops. I'm sorry, this is absolutely poor, absolutely poor. Yeah, my system doesn't allow much manipulation. Yeah, it's very discrete. So anyway, let me pretend that this is tetrahedron. I'm just making vertices thick to hide my this. Okay, so this is kind of tetrahedron, and let me just name things as something like this is the topmost thing. So say 1, and then in some cyclic way I can just name them 2. If I rotate like this, maybe 3, 4. Is that okay? So what are type 1? I'm just calling them type. So type 1 is that they are all determined by choice of what kind of axis you take. So my axis is going to be vertex along with midpoint of opposite face. And how many such things are possible? So how many choices of vertices are there? Right? 4 choices. 4. And each choice of vertex gives me how many rotations? Can you just tell me? This is 1 position, this is 2nd position, and this is 3rd position, right? So how many things in the rotation group I am getting here?
2.
Yeah. See, as such, I would in the beginning be inclined to say 3, but see, one of them is identity position, which we have already counted, right? So what are the
Yes,
new
sir.
ones? What are the new ones? So for each, we are getting 2, which correspond to uh, rotation by uh, 120 degree and 240 degree, right? So these are 8. And the way to enumerate them would be how, what? So I'm keeping 1 fixed. So I have 2, 3, 4, right? The rotation is happening only among 2, 3, 4 because 1 is fixed because that's part of the axis. And then the square of 2, 3, 4, which is 2, 4, 3. Square of 2, 3, 4 is 2, 4, 3, like that. And so on. And then you fix 1. So 1 is fixed, then you fix 2, fix 3, fix 4, like that. Okay. I hope this is fine with us. And the second one is so what is the axis? For axis, you take, can you guess what axis would there be? So this is somewhat strange. I take,
The midpoint of one edge to the
yeah,
opposite midpoint,
yeah.
diagonally
So I,
kind.
I, I take this edge, and when I hold this edge, there is only one edge which is kind of opposite to it, which is this one. Okay, this one. So I hold this, I hold this, I hold it in this fashion. So these are midpoint of edges, and then I rotate. And I get the same thing, right? Similar looking thing. So axes are uh, midpoints of opposite edges. And how many choices are there? So how many edges are there in all? There are 6 edges, right? If I hold it like this, 3 in the base and 3 as like top to bottom. So there are 6 edges, but how many pairs of edges are there? 6 by 2. And each choice is giving me how many rotations? See, when I'm holding one edge, right? After the transformation, this edge has to go to same edge. The only thing is its vertex is the top vertex will come down and bottom vertex will go up. So this edge will have only 2 configurations, like this and like that. So what new I am getting is only 1. Okay, because vertices are being switched, and that's the only new thing. So there are 3 such. And if I want to enumerate them, how will I enumerate? I'm picking one. So what is happening is the swapping of vertices, right? If I'm holding the edge 1 2 versus 3 4. So suppose axis is the edge joining 1 2 and 3 4 midpoints, right? Then the corresponding rotation is given by this permutation, because 1 and 2 will be swapped and 3 4 will be swapped, and there are 3 such rotations because there are 6 by 2 choices. Okay, now what we can do is we can list all of them and construct a group. So I actually have a group. So group law, as per the I can have composition of these permutations, composition of these permutations. See, in the beginning, I had rotation matrices and all that, but here when I am observing this, it is more convenient to write what is the effect of the rotation on the vertices, right? And then I am thinking of them as permutation. So composition of 3 permutations of these permutations is actually gives, and you have to work a bit more, that the group of rotational symmetries is, and you know what it is, right? Group of rotational symmetries of tetrahedron is what is called A4, alternating group on 4 elements. Some of you might have seen this in your group theory course. Alternating group on 4 letters or 4 symbols. Okay, and if you do similar analysis on for example icosahedron, then what you can do, let's quickly do that. Type 0, I'll blindly write E. Type 1. So what is type 1? Type 1 for us earlier was what? Okay, so there's no type 1 here. So I'll take just opposite vertices. This is icosa here, opposite vertices, right? When I hold opposite vertices here, right? I'm holding opposite vertices. And what are all possible rotations? If I'm having it like this, then I can have how many new rotations apart from identity? Yeah. this pentagon, right? What you see is a pentagonal configuration, which is rotating itself. So what do I have? So for icosahedron, actually, the number of vertices is 12, number of edges is 30, and number of faces is 20. Yeah. So how many pairs of opposite vertices are there? 6.
6.
And each of them is giving me how many new rotations? See, this is pentagon, right? This is pentagon. So how many new rotations am I getting? So this is suppose identity, right? How many?
4.
Yeah, we are getting 4, of course. Yeah. So these are 24. And type 2. And let me take opposite edges now. Opposite edges as axis. And how many pairs of opposite edges will be there? 15 pairs, right? And when I pick an edge, it's important that those vertices are swapped. So only 180-degree kind of rotation. So new rotation is only 1. So I get 15 of these, and I'll have type 3 here also. And type 3 is opposite edges. The opposite what? What is remaining now? Faces as axis. If I take opposite faces as the axis, opposite face midpoints of opposite faces, I should say, right? Midpoints, I should say, midpoint. Yeah, I should have been careful. Midpoints. Of, I should have added this phrase. Yeah. So how many opposite faces are there? Midpoints of opposite faces. So they total 20 faces. So 10, right? And to each opposite face, I'm holding midpoint of opposite face. How many symmetries will be there? New ones, new rotations. So the triangle. So triangle minus 1, 2. Okay. And you try to observe that there is nothing. And how many total are there? So 1 plus 15 plus 24 plus 20. 15 plus 24, 15, 16, 16 and 24, 40 plus 20 is 60. And you work a bit more. To check that the group is actually A5, what is called alternating group on 5 symbols. Okay, so naturally those alternating groups and permutation groups, they are playing an important role in our understanding of symmetries of these objects. And same case will be with the dodecahedron and cube. So as an information, I just can tell you, you play with cube and the group of rotational symmetries is and that is the information that I am giving you, but you should be able to verify this information that this group is actually S4. Yeah, this would require some effort, but anyway, you can actually count how many. So 24 is easy. It's easy to count that there are 24 because again the same kind of analysis, you can take opposite vertices, opposite faces and edges. So order is 24 is easy, but to determine that it's actually S4 may take some effort. Okay, with all this, now I'm all set to make some interesting statements. So let me just state it as a theorem. I wanted to exhibit actually the proof of it, because the proof includes a very nice group action and Burnside's counting formula, or in terms of fixed points, number of orbits, right? Professor Geeta must have done that. I wanted to exhibit, but I don't think I have time, but at least I can state the theorem. So this theorem could be named as yeah. So this is finite groups or finite subgroups of SO3. SO3 is all possible rotations, right? Or maybe rotations of a sphere. So statement is let G be a finite subgroup of SO3 then G is one of the following. Then G is one of the following. Number one, a finite cyclic group. And that is because you can embed an n-gon, a regular two-dimensional n-gon inside a sphere along the what you can call great circle. And for the same reason, all dihedral groups, perhaps you might have seen in your syllabus or even in this series, is one of the following, or maybe I should say a dihedral group, because for each n there is one dihedral group. So I should say a dihedral group. Okay. And what else? Some more groups we saw today, those will also occur in picture. But I'll finish the list of abelian ones. V4, we saw it, right? Klein's 4 group. When we are trying to understand symmetries of rectangle. So Klein's 4 group. And others are coming from platonic solids. A4, S4, and A5. So these are coming from thanks to platonic solids. P is capital. So why should these be subgroups of SO3? Because all these are having elements which can be thought of as rotation for suitable pictures, for suitable objects which are inscribable inside sphere. So these will be subgroups of SO3, and these two will be there. We should thank the two-dimensional case, thanks to regular n-gons, because you can imagine a picture where inside a sphere on the absolute midpoint, maybe across what you can call the Mediterranean line, like the middle line, and you can have the configuration of the regular n-gons on its periphery. And why does Klein's 4 group come? maybe that would be an exercise. Look at the tutorial. I am not saying it, but well, uh, Kleins 4 group is a subgroup of S4. That could be one explanation. So somewhere from cube, you might be able to extract Kleins 4 group. Okay. So this exercise I am giving, and I still have some 5 minutes. What goes in the proof? Maybe I can just outline proof. The way it goes is, of course, it's not the, I'm not claiming the entire proof here, rather the sketch of it. So I take a subgroup of SO3, finite subgroup, so when I pick an element in G, I think of it as, think of G as a rotation, right? Because it is an element of SO3. It's claiming to be subgroup of SO3, so better it be rotation. So it is rotation, and therefore it has an axis. Every rotation has an axis. Look at its axis, and you can prolong the axis if you need, and its intersection with what I would call, well, everyone calls unit sphere. So there's a line which is axis passing through origin, say, and you consider where does it intersect with a sphere of radius, say 1 unit. And this will give you 2 points. One point, and one is antipodal to the earlier point. Okay, so this gives us what we will like to call poles. Poles of the axis of this axis. And these are 2 poles, right? One and antipodal, and then you look at the collection of all the poles. Okay, so you consider, oops, you consider a set of all poles for entire G. So what is that? And I'm calling that set X. X consists of 2 poles of G, such that G is lying in this particular subgroup of SO3. And then there are some nice group actions. There is a group action and the way it works is, you take an element and you take a pole. Let me call it P for pole here. And pole is lying in unit sphere. So if it is a pole of G, this G, then it will not be moved, but it is pole of some other thing, it will be moved. Nevertheless, what it says that if you consider GP, meaning after rotating this pole with G, it goes somewhere. The point is that it goes to a pole. So poles go to pole. Pole goes to a pole. Poles go to poles. Okay. And that is action. When I state poles go to poles, that is an action. And you understand orbits of this action and restrict the possibilities. So I'm doing absolute hand waving. Uh, so you somewhere you use Burnside's or not the Burnside's lemma to understand this the orbits of this action and restrict possibilities of or action and maybe the better way to communicate it would be of this action and work out the configuration, the distribution, the possibilities of distribution of poles on the unit sphere. And then you would realize that those poles are precisely the ones which we have discussed in our discussion of Platonic solids. Okay. Meaning those poles will be like they will be coming, they will be having configuration as if it is a as if those are vertices of say octahedron or vertices of icosahedron and so on. So that way Platonic solids will naturally come into picture. So with this I stop. It's exactly 1 and I won't take more time than that. Yeah, if there are questions, I'll be happy.